Kev?
Dedicate the shirt to all the people wounded in the terrorist attack today and all the soldiers that are undergoing rehab for after for their injuries and others as well of Klal Israel.
Sure.
Mate,
Kevin, didn't know what happened today. I wasn't aware.
it's terrible. Absolutely, it's all over the news. It's absolutely terrible.
Really, Kevin, I hadn't looked. I must look.
Yeah, it's one of the worst days for
Haven't heard
reporting.
they guys. Where was it?
In Jerusalem, a place called Ramot, like a very religious, a Haredi area, and there's two terrorists went on a bus and just shot people indiscriminately, and six were killed and many injured, wounded.
Jesus.
I,
So
I think up to
that's what you're
20
dealing with
wounded
here.
and six have died, and it was at close
Mm.
range with semi-automatic. So it's an absolute disgrace.
That's what you're dealing with here. Yeah.
Jesus, that's bad.
Oh, no, that's bad, especially internally. That's the lack of security because of the Arab population. Boy,
Honestly, I don't think there should be a single Arab there, and I think you should drop a bomb on Gaza. But anyway, that's just me.
okay, well, at least we waited 4 minutes before getting into the show, before we get banned on YouTube. Nobody's going to listen that much. But you're right, Gav, I agree. Anyway, if you look at the Mishnah, this is what the whole share is based on, is all are exiled as a result of inadvertently killing an Israelite, and an Israelite is exiled as a result of inadvertently killing them, with the exception of a resident alien. Can you see that, guys? Guys, are you reading?
Yeah.
Can you see?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
All right, I can put it off now. So that's where we are in the Mishnah. And just to go through some of the wording is that when you read this term, all are exiled. I'm hearing background noise. I'm not sure where it's from.
I'll switch my. I don't think it's me, but I'll.
I'm not sure where it's from. Okay, guys, just put on mute for a second. So if you look at the section on the Mishnah, it says all are exiled as a result of inadvertently killing an Israelite. So what does that mean? Because if you've got that phrase, what does it come to add? Because we know that not all people are exiled as a result of inadvertently killing an Israelite. Can't mean all nationalities because non-Jews are not subject to exile. Generally, the rule is if you kill an Israelite, even inadvertently, there's the death penalty. One of the reasons being is that even when a Jew kills another Jew inadvertently, unless they escape to the Ira Miklat, the city of refuge, they're susceptible to getting killed by the Goel Adam, the victim's relatives, because there is a degree of negligence there. So certainly when another nation doesn't have that ability for atonement, they're not going to have that refuge for exile to live amongst the Levim. So what does it come to add? It comes to add a slave and a kutat and teaches that they are also exiled for an inadvertent killing. So just we're not talking about an ordinary slave here. We're talking about Eved Kanani, and it's a Gentile, and he becomes a slave of a Jew, but he's got like this quasi-Jewish status. In other words, he's obligated to perform mitzvahs incumbent upon women. Obviously, he's excluded from performing mitzvahs that are time-bound because he's a slave. His time is not his own. So he has got this quasi-Jewish status. Not all slaves from all nations have it. And therefore, he's also subject to exile. But we're going to see the limitations and applications thereof. Now, the Kuthites, Kevin, am I pronouncing it correctly? Because I looked at the Hebrew, it says Kuti. So
Kutim.
English,
Kuti, yeah.
yeah, so it's
Yeah. That's, I
Kutim
think, yes.
or Kuthites in English, but
Kuti for in the singular, Kutim in the plural.
yeah, but we're talking about the whole nation here. So in English, in the historian BBC journal, they refer to as Kuthites. That's how they pronounced it. I checked in the journal.
That sounds right.
And just to give you guys a bit of a summary, in the second book of Kings, in chapter 17, from verse 24 to 41, you'll find their referencing. And basically, they were one of the nations brought by the Assyrians to populate the part of Eretz Israel that was left desolate by the exile of the 10 tribes. So in secular history, they were known as the Samaritans. I'm sure you've heard the phrase Good Samaritans, and you've heard the word. So the Samaritans were later given that name, which were the Sadducees. In English, they were called the Samaritans, but originally they were the Kuthites. And that name means they lived in Samaria. That's why it was Samaritans. And it was a geographical name. Now, when they use the term Good Samaritans, if you look at both the Sadducees as well as the Kuthites, they were anything but good. I can tell you something. They had a track record like the Pope, and which wasn't great. So these people converted to Judaism because there was this whole outbreak of lion attacks, and they thought they were being punished for not observing the religion of the land. So it only started happening when they resided in Israel and not when they were living in Samaria. So they decided to convert. And their status as Jews was debated by the sages. They weren't sure. It mentions this in Kedushin 75b. Schottenstein how taught this. And inasmuch as their conversion was less than sincere, it was still a conversion. So there are different levels of conversion. Obviously, there are many people that fall in love with their spouse and convert to a religion in order to marry that spouse. So it doesn't mean that they're not going to be observant, but they have another motive apart from converting just purely for the sake of conversion. So it was debated. And there were certain also benefits in not just this outbreak of lions to convert to Judaism, certain political and economic benefits. So the Mishnah and Gemara here consider them eligible for exile at this point, and they consider them Jewish. Okay, but there is some important thing to know, and I'm sure Gavin Simpson knows this, is in later Talmudic times, these people were discovered to be worshipping this image of a dove on Mount Gerizim. Okay, I don't know exactly what form of avodah zarah it is, but as a result, the later sages categorically said, listen, they're not Jewish. And where was that written down? If you look at the notes on Chulin 6a, which was more recent than Kedushin 75b, not in order, but in terms of when the history was recorded, at that point they were lost their quasi-Jewish status. So this Gemara is talking about at that point where that had that status. I'm just putting the share on pause. Hang on. Okay, so it's important to know that everything is in a historical context. This is not just lore and folklore and legend. It's based on historical fact. So the Gemara says, look, it comes to include a slave and a Kuthite and teaches that they also exiled for an inadvertent killing, which in fact, in a certain way, is a mercy, because how the idolaters are treated or other nations is if they inadvertently killed a Jew, they would die. Even Jews are susceptible to the Goel Adam unless they do some sort of repentance in the city of refuge. So we've learned by inference from the Mishnah that the rabbis taught explicitly in a brisa, a slave or Kuthite is exiled and receives lashes as a result of what he did to an Israelite. So now we're comparing this Mishnah to a brisa, and the rabbis taught in both cases that what's this issue of lashes as a result of what they did to an Israelite. We're going to go through it, but it's going to say that there has to be a reciprocity, a quid pro quo, that whatever's done to an Israelite is done to a Kuthite and a slave. If they want to enjoy the same benefits, then if they harm each other, they can almost accept a similar sort of punishment along those lines of both mercy and justice, paralleled as opposed to non-Jewish nations. So basically, they receive lashes as a result of what they did to a Kuthite or slave. So in other words, it works in the Hebrew both way around. If an Israelite damaged a Kuthite or a slave, or vice versa, a Kuthite and a slave damaged an Israelite, the penalty would be the same either way. It has to be. In order to get that sort of protection where they're treated as a Jew, they have to be also punished as a quasi-status Jew. So we can understand that the brisa means when it says that a slave or kutat is exiled as a result of an Israelite or receive lashes. But what we're not quite sure of is where the parallels kind of fall down. So we're saying that in what case could it be that um, a person could receive lashes? Well, one of the examples that the Gemara uses is it says, like, if you curse a fellow Jew with one of the names of Hashem, it's punishable by lashes. And that's in Shavuos 35a. So the prohibition is specifically from Sanhedrin, even though it mentions in Shavuos 35a. Gavin, do you remember? I was learning this at Mahasha, but you were part of the shir. 66a, you were learning it from Simplestein Howard's house. So what it did is it said, look, it first brought in the Torah prohibition that you're not allowed to curse a prince. And then it said you're not allowed to curse a judge, or you're not allowed to curse a deaf person. And then the prohibition was extended to curse anybody else from the Jewish nation. And where do you find that's in Shmot? If you look in Shmot chapter 22, verse 27, it says, why is it that an Israelite could be lashed for cursing a kutat or a slave? We understand why they lashed for cursing an Israelite because of this biblical edict in Shemot chapter 22, verse 27. But we don't understand, the Gemara says, why in reverse a Jew should be subjected to that sort of lash, because they're not part of the Jewish people. Because why does it use the example of a prince in Sanhedrin? Gavin, do you remember? When we were learning it together. Gav?
So you said this was what, in 66? What was it?
66a, do you remember?
No, I only started Sanhedrin at 67.
That was the best answer I've heard all year. That's brilliant.
Right.
Okay.
So I think I nailed that.
You nailed that. So basically, it was using the term prince because you have to act with a certain amount of decorum, like a prince would. And therefore, Jews, because they act with a certain number of halachic decorum in terms of the stringent standards placed upon them, there's no cursing that's allowed, and anybody that curses an Israelite would receive lashes. But the Kuttats, apart from later being found to worship Avodah Zarah, even at the time when they were sincere, their conduct was less than exemplary. It was better than some of the other non-Jewish nations, but certainly not exemplary. So it says, well, how can you answer this? In other words, if there's a principle of exile for a slave and an exile for a kutat, as well as an Israelite, it's saying there seems to be a problem with this. Why are they made to be the exception? And the Gemara is bringing examples where it doesn't work in reciprocity. All right, Aidan, what is it can you give it back to me just so I can see you with me before I question Lance and Kevin?
I'm not really with you, eh?
I know I had a few.
Could you? Yeah, sorry. I'm
No, there's
just
nothing
not
to
following. I'm
apologize
trying
for.
to.
There's nothing to apologize for. I'm here to make sure that you guys get it. I'm not here to like catch you out. I'm here to see if I've lost you. It's my fault too. You get what I'm saying? So, Lance, do you want to answer it? Do you see what the Gemara's problem with?
Just to get clarity, the Kusim, they were converts.
Correct.
So why are they put in the same bracket as slaves?
Okay, excellent question. Because this is what we want to find out, is that the beginning of the Mishnah is saying, look, all the other nations do not get the mercy of exile for inadvertent killing. Any non-Jew that kills an Israelite gets the death penalty, with the exception of a kutat and a slave. So for two reasons. A kutat converted, but because they converted as a result of duress, of them dropping down like flies when lions would attack them, the minute they left Samaria and landed up in Eretz Israel, their conversion is known as less than sincere. almost like somebody that converts because they're mad about somebody and they met somebody, they want to get married. But before that, they had no interest in Yiddishkeit. In other words, it's not like they were on a journey and happened to meet somebody that was Jewish. That's a little bit different. It's a case of they fell in love. Okay, what do I have to do to marry you? Boom, 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 boom. So it's not that it's not a conversion. There are levels of conversion. And because there's other motives or it's less than sincere for its own reasons of just converting, they have got a Jewish status, but they are judged in certain cases as perhaps not necessarily the same rules of mercy would apply to them because they had a hidden motive for conversion. And especially in the later sources in Kuchul 6a, if I remember correctly, when their conversion was revoked. Then they became like any other Noah
But
at best.
but the slaves have got the status, or the slaves need to observe Yiddishkeit the same as the women. Those
Yes,
are the laws of.
the
But the Christian, was that the same for them?
no. The reason why the slaves, a Canaanite slave, an ever Kanani, had to observe halacha like a woman is because women are not obligated to time-bound mitzvahs. And since a slave, a Canaanite slave, did not own his own time, he worked for his master, his time was not his own. And therefore, even
Same.
an employee and an employer, if you're on a company time, you can't just sit there on Xbox. You get what I'm saying. So it wasn't
So
incumbent upon them to have time-bound mitzvahs.
would a Jewish slave have the same, you call it, leniency?
I think
In
I
terms
need
of,
to find out, but I think a Jewish slave has got far more preferential treatment. In fact, if there's a limitation of resources between the master and the slave gets the pillow if there's only one pillow. And I think his status is that on certain festivals and other obligatory observances,
he must sit in
he
a sukkah, and he must.
correct. In terms of time-bound mitzvahs restrictions, it might be that he's not allowed to stag and learn Torah full day when he has to be working in an employed capacity, but it might be in many other statuses he's incumbent upon him to keep all the positive mitzvahs as well as the negative mitzvahs incumbent upon a man, a Jewish man, within certain restrictions. Within certain restrictions. Whereas a Canaanite slave is a quasi-Jewish status. Because he's living in a Jewish household, um, I think he obviously has to adhere to certain rules. So so Lance is bringing a good point. So Aidan, what we're trying to find out here is as follows. Kev, the rest of you, I'm not sure if you're following, is that we're saying, look, we have to understand what it is that a kutat or kutim, what if you use the English or the Hebrew, it doesn't matter, you get what I'm saying, and a Canaanite slave, why are they having such merit to be judged favorably in terms of being allowed to have exile when they kill an Israelite, when any of the other nations would die as a result? That's what's first proposed to the Gemara. And same too, when an Israelite kills a Canaanite slave or a Kutat, he's eligible for exile as well, if it's inadvertent. And if it's on purpose, it is the death penalty. So we want to know what's so special about them. But before we want to find that out, we want to say, well, does this hold up to scrutiny? Because we're trying to punch holes in this argument and say, hang on, there might be cases in which a slave or a kutat is given a different penalty to an Israelite in terms of a criminal or civil infraction of law. Does that make sense? So we're trying to punch holes in it by bringing Bryces and other Gemaras to see if in fact that parallel exists, that the three of them are actually equal or are there differences?
Okay, yeah, fine. I get that.
Okay. Do you get it clearer now that I've explained it?
Yeah, much.
Okay. All right. Sorry if I went on and on now. I just was, Lance asked a great question, and I just wanted to explain what the Gemara is trying to do. So the first thing it says is, hang on a second. We know this isn't true, because if you curse an Israelite, you get lashed. And it's in Shemot chapter 22, verse 27. It's clear. And it's in Sanhedrin 66a, and it's there. So, but it's not true. You can curse a Canaanite and a slave. It's just words. It's not assault. And they're not conducting themselves with the integrity of the Torah, so they don't receive lashes. So the Gemara is already saying, hang on a second. It's not a case where there's the same level of stringency. So Gemara says, well, can you give us an answer? And Rav Acha Bar Yaakov turned around and says, look, the case in which Israelites receive lashes as a result of a kutat is what we have to find. So in other words, what we can see with this penalty of cursing. So the Gemara Aden brought an objection and said, if you curse a Canaanite and you curse a slave, you don't get lashed, but if you curse an Israelite, you can. But the Gemara's argument isn't on the cursing. It's on the case of if lashes apply to all three, does it work where it applies to an Israelite versus a Canaanite and a slave, or does it also apply to a slave and a Canaanite versus an Israelite? So as far as for cursing, it only applies to doing it to an Israelite. You don't get that for a Kutat and a slave. So Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says, no, we can find a case where what's done to one is done to another. And when you have a Kutat and there's Eidim Zomimim, and a Kutat can testify, and he comes before the course and he gives false witnesses. Now, when do you get a lashed? Well, you might have accused the defendant of transgressing a negative commandment, and therefore Kutat said, yes, I saw him transgress, and therefore the penalty is lashes. And when he's caught out between sentencing and the verdict being carried out, they find the Kutat lied, or the two Kutim lied, then in that particular case, they get lashed because that's what they wanted to do to that Jew, because that's the penalty for breaking a negative commandment. So far it applies to a Kutat as well as an Israelite. Kevin, anybody? Do you think there's going to be a problem with this argument?
What do you mean a problem with what?
With an argument. I mean, we know with a Kutat can testify and say if there's Eidim Zomimim and he wanted to get an Israelite lashed, if he's caught out, he's lashed. So and it's the same with an Israelite against a Kutat. So we're saying with an Israelite, if an Israelite testifies against a Kutat and he speaks falsely and he's caught out, he can get lashed if he transgresses against the Kutat. So we just found an example where if a Kutat testified conspiringly against an Israelite for breaking a negative commandment, he's lashed. If an Israelite does the same thing to a Kutat, at which whatever penalty he's subject to, he is lashed. It carries that penalty, and he's caught out to be a conspiring witness, he's lashed. So we can see the penalty for an Israelite for Eidim Zomimim and a Kutat testifying against the other group does come with lashes. So it appears they're both treated equally for that infraction. What do you think the problem is? What's the status of a slave? What's the problem? Because it has to work out with both a Kutat, an Israelite, and a slave. Now, what's the problem with the slave?
Is it his Jewish status? Isn't that one of the main issues? He's not Tanakh if he's Jewish.
And therefore, he's got a quasi-Jewish, correct? He's not as Jewish as a Kutat.
So should his testimony even held up in court?
Exactly, Kevin. Well done. Well done. So Kevin is saying a Kutat is a Jew, even if he converted from a self-defense point of view, to not get eaten by the lions in Eretz Israel when they left Samaria because they were attacked. So it kept the lions at bay. So we're saying even if they had a hidden motive, they were still Jewish at the point that they converted. Is a slave a Jew? No, it's a quasi-Jew, which means the mitzvahs are upon him the same as a woman, but not time-bound mitzvahs, and not all the mitzvahs, only certain mitzvahs. So therefore, let me ask you a question. Are women allowed to testify in court, Aidan?
No.
And therefore, if a Canaanite slave is quasi-Jewish, that is incumbent upon him only mitzvahs obligated to a woman and he's not obligated to time-bound mitzvahs, do you think he'd be allowed to testify if a woman is not, a Jewish woman is not?
Well, I don't really know the reason that a Jewish woman is not allowed to. If it's because of like her status with mitzvahs, then no, um the quasi-Jew wouldn't.
No, the quasi-Jew, yes, the quasi-Jew slave can't, exactly. So even if the reasons are different, if the mitzvahs parallel, like remember we learned about beheading, even if it's different, but there's a parallel death penalty that's associated with exile. There's certain parallels that if you compared halachically to a status of a halachic woman, then even if the reasons are different, it could mean you prohibited from testifying. So the prohibition for a slave for testifying is two reasons. Women don't testify, but further to which a slave is not independent of himself, and therefore he can't testify, both because his time is not his own and it's taking away from his master's time, but further to which his testimony is skewed because he's not an independent person. Do you get what I'm saying? There's bias. So on that basis, and also he's not a halachic Jew in full, and therefore, unlike a kutat, he can't testify. So therefore, there's a problem in the Gemara. Because in the corresponding case, it would have to be that a kutat or the kutim, a Canaanite slave and an Israelite have the same sort of status that what the kutim and the Canaanite slave did to the Israelite could do to them and vice versa. Do you get it? And that's where it falls short in this particular example, in lashes in this particular example. So the Gemara now has to find another explanation for the Bryce's ruling that an Israelite receives lashes for an act committed against a kutat. Because initially what they said is, fine, if a kutat and I'll give you one point is that do you know guys what the status is for murdering a slave?
It's not the death
Ye-
penalty. No, sorry.
What do you
I think it is the death penalty.
Okay, so Kevin says it's not, and you say it is. Okay. And Gavin Simpson is 100% right. Gavin, it's in Shemot chapter 21, verse 20 to 21. And therefore, if an Israelite deliberately murders a Canaanite slave, he gets the death penalty. And is therefore inadvertently exiled for killing one. That's the proposition, because if it's in Shemot for a deliberate case where he would get the death penalty, that's the point it's trying to make. You get what I'm saying? It's using that as the premises, because Mefurish, if he deliberately kills a Canaanite slave, he gets the death penalty. Absolutely. So therefore, the issue is here is that if an Israelite is an Eidim Zomimim, or two of them are Eidim Zomimim against conspiring witnesses against a Canaanite slave or against a Kutat, they're liable to get lashed. In other words, guys, if you're going to get killed for deliberately killing a Canaanite slave, and it's in Shemot, chapter 21, then you're going to obviously get lashed for conspiring as a witness against a Canaanite slave. Why wouldn't the same apply if he was convicted based on your testimony? So that works out. But the problem, and it works out with a kutat, the problem is it doesn't work the other way around. Because a kutat can testify against an Israelite, but a Canaanite slave has a quasi-Jewish status according to the halachos of a woman, and therefore can't testify. So it doesn't work in the invoice. And that's what the Gemara has a problem with. All clear? Guys, are you with me
Yeah.
so far?
Yeah, clear, crystal.
Okay, good. All right, so the Gemara says, so what could be another way that an Israelite could receive lashes for an act committed against a Kutite. So what did we rule out? We ruled out the cursing. We ruled out the cursing because you can curse a Canaanite slave and you can curse a Kutite. We've ruled out the Adam Zumimim case because a slave cannot testify and therefore he cannot be involved in an Adam Zumimim case where he gets another Jew or Kutite to get lashed and therefore he's not lashed. So it has to work in all three cases. Okay? So Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, explained, look, let's find a final case. We're dealing here a case where an Israelite struck with a blow either Canaanite slave or alternatively a Kutite, okay, whose injury does not amount to a pruta. Now, you might say, well, are you responsible for damaging your own property? Well, we might be talking of an example of you hit a Canaanite slave belonging to another Jew. So what's this injury does not amount to a pruta? So basically, Rav Ami said in the name of Rav Yochanan, you strike somebody with a blow whose injury does not amount to a pruta, he receives lashes. Why? Okay, I'll tell you why. If we remember, we went through Kesubos 33a in Bava Kama, and basically, if there's a negative commandment and that negative commandment has basically two punishments. For striking, you get lashes, but there's also a financial fee for damages, and then we only apply the financial fee because you've got Kimle B'di Rabbi Minay, meaning we only apply the greater penalty. And therefore, since the assailant has to pay for the damages, he can't be doubly penalized and is exempt from the penalty of Makkos. But if the damages amount to less than a pruta, in other words, you can't sue a person for that because it's not worth a financial court case, and they're not subject to any court action, the assailant receives lashes since this is now the sole penalty. And we're saying this is a particular case. So in other words, the Israelite either punched and hit a Canaanite slave or a Kutite, and either way, not enough to incur court fees for civil charges and damages actions, so therefore receiving lashes. And therefore, you can't equate the laws of hitting with the laws of cursing, because what happens is that there's a whole debate in Sanhedrin 85b, which Gavin was part of, and there's opinion that hitting is equated with cursing. So if you're using that sort of analogy, it means you would be exempt from Makkos, because apparently you can curse a non-observant person, and you would be exempt from punishment. But the problem is, if you hit a non-observant person, are you liable for the punishment or not? And this is debated in Sanhedrin, and saying, is cursing and hitting related, or are they independent? And therefore, if it's saying here that we're not relating to cursing, but actually a law of hitting, of assault, then even though an Israelite does not receive lashes for cursing a Kutite, because there's no punishment for it, he's nonetheless liable to for lashes for striking him, and the same as a Canaanite slave if it belongs to a fellow Jew. I don't know if it belongs to yourself if you're damaging your own property. All right, I think we're going to end on this note. We've got 3 minutes left. Guys, does it make sense?
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay. Gavin Simpson, do you see what the Gemara is trying to do here? I haven't heard
Yeah,
you.
no, I think so. I do think so. No, that definitely makes sense. There's no question. I'm just trying to understand exactly where we see the status of the Ebed of the Canaanites of the Kuthi. Just trying to understand exactly where they fit into the status. Not so simple to understand that.
Exactly. So the Gemara is using a process of elimination.
Mm.
It's kind of bothered by a couple of things and says, look, in the exceptions where what applies to an Israelite in terms of punishment for hitting a Kutite or a Canaanite slave is not the same as vice versa, and in some cases it is. So where do we have common ground, and where are the exceptions contextually based if they're given the same treatment with regards to exile? That's all we're saying. So it's trying to punch holes in it and see if there's remedies. That's all. Lance,
Damon,
question, yeah?
just want to check, did I hear correctly that you said that it's permissible to curse?
I can't hear you.
You said that it's
I said it's not
acceptable,
punishable. I'm not saying it's an acceptable behavior. I said it's not punishable by lashes.
but okay, so if you basically curse a frimhead, you get lashes, but non-frimhead, you don't get lashes.
That's about the sum of it, yeah.
Wow. I would have thought a head's a head. Doesn't
Well,
mean, yeah, anyway.
listen, I think the reality is that I don't know the standards that they adhere to in those particular days. I have no idea. I just know that
I think it's a pasuk, Damon. I think it's a pasuk. I think it mentions the same thing with lashon hara. It mentions Yachim, your brother, and how you define your brother. It's someone who's observant, someone who's shomer mitzvot.
So that I'd be interested if you could actually look into for me, because um, does it apply that it only to observant Yidden, or is it a blanket rule for your brother, meaning all Yidden?
No. It's observance. I remember hearing this many years ago, but I've heard it subsequently as well. No, for Rabbi Berkowitz, I first heard it from Asia Torah. But yeah, no, it's achim. So it's the same thing with lashon hara and all these type of things. It's a lot. It involves a lot. So it's speaking about someone who's observant yid.
Okay, so you know what? I want to try and see if I can find a share in it, because Lance, I'd be interested in listening to how it applies today. Look, I think it would make sense, Lance, to a certain degree, because if certain Adam's testimony was revoked based on their level of behavior and observance, and if they were habitual sinners or gamblers, etc., and we don't accept their testimony, there might be a certain standard. But cursing is different to hitting. Do you get what I'm saying? So, Lance, that's where the whole argument in Sanhedrin comes, is that if you're not punished for cursing a secular Jew,